Welcome to video 7 of A Rabbi Encounters the Universe. The name of this video is A Rabbi Encounters God. Other arguments for God. In the last video, we looked at the 3 classical proofs for the existence of God brought by philosophers: the ontological proof, the cosmological proof, the teleological proof. Arguments in favor of each of those and against them. And today I want to give some other arguments brought by numerous thinkers and philosophers. And I want to begin with Blaise Pascal, what is often known as Pascal's wager. Pascal was a Christian. He was also a gambler and a mathematician. And he said, what are the odds? What is the best bet in terms of belief in God? There are 4 possibilities. First of all, either God exists or God does not exist. Second, either we believe in God or we don't believe in God. If God exists and we believe in God, we'll go to heaven, we'll live happily ever after. If we believe in God and God does not exist, so we've wasted some time in church, but there's no ultimate consequences. If we don't believe in God and God does not exist, it doesn't matter at all. But the basic argument of Pascal is if we don't believe in God and God does exist, at least according to his theology, we're going to be subjected to eternal damnation. We're going to be punished forever for a lack of belief if God does exist. So what is the best bet? According to Pascal's wager, the best bet is to believe in God. Notice that he doesn't prove the existence of God. He just says that belief in God is the best bet as to how we should live our lives. Now, we could dismiss that argument, but one of the greatest thinkers in America, William James, built on that argument. William James was one of the early founders of the American approach to philosophy known as pragmatism. Pragmatism is truth is whatever works. And James did not prove the existence of God. He didn't think it was possible to prove it. He did write varieties of religious experience, so he was obviously a religious man, a man who took his religion seriously. And he wrote an essay called The Will to Believe. And in that essay, he said that people ought to believe in God, not because we could prove that God exists, because once again, it's a good bet. There's a certain quality of life that one gets on a very pragmatic level if one believes in God. He said that any important belief in life must be something that's live, forced, and momentous. To quote him in that essay, live, forced, and momentous. It must be a belief that really makes a difference in your life. And according to James, to believe in God really makes a difference. It gives life a purpose, it creates a community, becomes a basis of ethics. So, although he never proves the existence of God, it's a powerful argument that to believe in God for very pragmatic purposes leads to a better quality of life. A lot of people are troubled by these kinds of arguments. We should believe in God not because we could prove it, but we should believe in God because there's good consequences. But I will admit, as a rabbi, I've used this kind of argument that there's a quality of life to making that belief part of our lives. But moving on to a very different approach, one of the first founders of the philosophical approach known as existentialism, the Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who was what we call a theist, somebody who said that we can't prove, or we shouldn't even philosophically talk about belief in God, that ultimately God is about faith, and we need to use Kierkegaard's own words, make a leap of faith. Kierkegaard said there's 3 different ways you could choose to live your life. In fact, many people go through all 3 at various stages of their life. There's what he called the aesthetic life, and for Kierkegaard, aesthetic means the pursuit of pleasure. That one could live one's life looking for fun and eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die, to quote the Bible, but Kierkegaard himself would admit that such a life in the end doesn't amount to much. You can live the ethical life, which is the life that most of the good people of Copenhagen, where he lived, went about their lives. They went to church on Sunday, they married, they went to work, they tried to do the right thing. They were decent, good people. But Kierkegaard felt that such a life is a life without passion. You don't feel like you're living in the presence of God. A life with passion was the life that was lived by Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. And he wrote about this in his book, Fear and Trembling, how Abraham was willing to make an absolute leap of faith and live in the presence of God, even when God demanded that he sacrifice his son, Isaac. Abram was willing to go ahead. He was a knight of faith, a knight of resignation, a man who was totally willing to live his life in the presence of God. And that's the kind of choice that Kierkegaard thinks we ought to make. As I said, he was an existentialist. Existentialism teaches you exist, you have freedom. How are you going to live your life? And to Kierkegaard, the way to live your life is to make that leap of faith and live in God's presence. One other powerful argument used by many people even today for the existence of God is what is often called the ethical argument. Why believe in God? Because belief in God leads to an ethical life. And without God, what is the source of ethics? The one that said this most clearly was the great Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky in his novel The Brothers Karamazov. The Brothers Karamazov is about three brothers with a very evil father. Eventually, a fourth illegitimate brother appears, and the question arises, should they kill their father? Would this make the world a better place? And one of the brothers, Ivan, who's really the atheist in the book, says, without God, everything is permissible. Without God, everything is permissible. And it's a strong argument used by people today. We need God as a source of ethics. It's often called divine command theory. But it does make God somewhat arbitrary. What if God says, take your son up to a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice and kill him? Do you do it because God says so? Well, Kierkegaard says you do. The strongest argument against this ethical approach was made by Plato using Socrates as the main character in one of his dialogues, Euthyphro. Euthyphro is a young man who's bringing his father up on capital charges for beating a slave to death. And Socrates confronts Euthyphro and says, why are you doing this? And Euthyphro says it's the pious thing to do. And so Socrates and Euthyphro argue about piety. What is piety? And Euthyphro finally says, piety is doing what the gods say. If the gods say to do this, you do it, and that's the pious thing to do. And so Socrates asks one of the truly great questions in philosophy. Is something pious because the gods say it, or do the gods say it because it's pious? Or to translate that question in more modern Jewish or Christian or Islamic terms, is something good because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because it is good? It was good before God ever said it. Is something wrong because God said it's wrong, or did God say it's wrong because it's wrong? Is murder wrong because God said it was wrong in the Ten Commandments? Or did God say it was wrong in the Ten Commandments because it was already wrong before God ever said it? It's known as the Euthyphro problem, and I think it's a brilliant criticism of this approach to belief in God. That some things are right or wrong, whether God says it or not. And without God, I think Dostoevsky did not get this one right. Without God, we cannot say that everything is permissible. Even without God, there are certain things that are still impermissible. So these are just a few of the arguments that people use for the existence of God. In a future talk, I will give my own reason why I believe in God and why it fits my own scientific worldview. But I hope you enjoy this. I hope you subscribe, and I look forward to future talks.